It's the Security Weekly News special holiday edition for 2024. It's the end of the year or so. I mean, it's probably close to the end of the year. I think so. I'm not sure when they're going to air this, but soon it's going to be 2025. Yeah. So I invited the esteemed Russ Beauchemin, who is a professor of cybersecurity, and to come on and talk about probably the end of humanity. I think that's probably what we're going to talk about. So stick around.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
From the Security Weekly Vault, it's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for the Security Weekly News. All right, from exile on the island of Elba, I'm Doug White, and it is the holiday season. Don't drink and drive. When you can drink and use an autonomous vehicle, then that might have a bar, which you're now drinking and riding, which is okay. Well, you know, Philip K. Dick wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the basis for Blade Runner, if you're not familiar, in 1968. And they had flying cars. And they also had autonomous beings that were pretty much better than humans in a whole lot of ways, although they were a little bit murdery. You know, it's just a little bit murdery. They had a reason, but, you know, Asimov wrote I, Robot in 1950. And that was even before, like, Jeff Mann was born, and introduced the idea of robots that were autonomous, but they were regulated by his 3 laws of robotics. Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001 and 1968 and predicted tablets, the internet, video call. And William Gibson wrote Neuromancer in 1984, predicting virtual reality, implants that connected you to some kind of altered virtual state, AIs toying with the human race for their own reason. And Neil Stephenson wrote Snow Crash in 1992, predicting a virus that hacks your optic nerve. It's all out there in the future, and the future is kind of here. So let's talk about that. Hi, Russ.
Hi, Doug. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, glad you could be on again. We miss you being around. You were for so long. We were all on, and we aired a couple of old SDLs recently. I know you're kind of a futurist person and an expert on all that kind of stuff. And I think the first thing I wanted to ask you about was about copyrights in the age of AI, because what we're seeing right now is AIs like ChatGPT or whatever, all sucking up data at an alarming rate, and companies that back these products trying to get their hands on as much data as possible because they want to feed everything that has ever been, feed every written work ever. And if they're not feeding it in there, somebody else is. So one of the first things I was thinking of was what happens if say I put a student puts my slides from my class into ChatGPT and says, could you just explain these to me in a way I can understand? I mean, that's going on, right? I mean, that was the article you were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, and so what I would call all of our attentions to in recent media about this, one of the major issues that this was brought up in is the SAG After Strike, right? This lasted for quite some time, and this is the Screen Actors Guild, and a lot of the actors and writers, one of the major components or reasons for the strike was exactly copyright. And who owns this? Can XYZ company use my voice or my likeness to create simulated visualizations and virtualizations of my voice, of my talking head, if you will, or even of my body? And we've seen all this through deep fakes for the last, 5-10 years, something like that. And so a lot of people are starting to get nervous, or at least not even starting, but continuing to get even more nervous about what this means for intellectual property or IP rights, right? And when we talked about or planned for the show, we talked about the possibility of or exploring this idea of what it means for IP or intellectual property, and who owns what content. So from your question, you're talking about it from a professorial standpoint, and different institutions have different contracts, union versus non-union, and even across those, right, areas, right, they still talk about who owns content for your class, right? At the institution that we've worked at, the intellectual property belongs to the professor, so the professor has control over the content. And we've seen, as you probably rightly know, we've seen this our content being uploaded to quote unquote helping academic sites, where really they just become like study.com, or insert du jour website for that type of thing here to help students study, when in fact that content is being shared with other people over the internet, right, on public facing networks. So from my point of view, look, I don't really care about my content, recordings, syllabi. I care about the test questions, so I have a real big problem if somebody was uploading test questions and answers as a study.
They are,
guide. And they are.
They're uploading them. No, they are.
are. Yep, they sure are. Oftentimes, I'll check those site du jours, whatever they might be, because they've been around since, I would say 10 years after the internet was created. And I check.
I'd say 10 minutes after the internet was created.
Yeah, 10 minutes after the internet was created. But so I check those sites regularly, and obviously I don't have time because we're busy professing, if you will, and studying and researching and writing. So we don't have time to, check and curate our own resources or check to see if they've been curated for us on public open networks. But we do the best we can to remain vigilant about our content, right? But at the dawn of this AI and LLMs, language learning models, right? These machines, these neural networks, have access to more resources, time, and processing power than I do, and they can scour the internet for these types of things, and quote unquote learn from them, right? So I honestly, I have mixed reviews about whether or not, I personally don't have a problem with it, but I can understand where people might, right? Because intellectual property does somehow relate to.
I kind of disagree with you that you don't have a problem with it, because I think you do have a problem with it. You just don't realize it. Because you say you don't care, but you'll care when you don't have a job anymore. Because, so, for example, I took a class one time, a long, long time ago, from a guy who was dead. And the university was airing videos that had been made of this professor when he was alive. And they were re-airing them to classes. They may still be airing them today. I don't know. This was, 40 years ago, but they may still be using those stupid things because, hey, why pay somebody if I don't need you and I can ingest you, that sounds bad. If I can take you teaching your class and record all that and take all your content and I put it into an LLM, and that LLM can essentially produce a deep fake. I don't even have to have your face. I don't care. I'll put a bland, robotic face on the screen. I'll put max headroom up, and use that. I don't need to pay you anymore.
Right.
And so at the moment now, and this is not true at every institution by any means, but at where I work, they do have some rules about intellectual property. So if I record videos on their site, which I do all the time, they don't own them. I do.
Right.
And that's fine. But when a student takes one of those videos and they upload it onto ChatGPT, it becomes part of ChatGPT. And if it turns out when some student says, could you give me, and I haven't tried that with ChatGPT. Could you say, give me a lecture on Mark Twain or something to see what it does?
No, I've asked for quotes from various.
But I mean more like now I want you to process. I want you to give me a lecture on the societal contribution of Mark Twain or something like that. I'm going to have to try that. But if I say give me a lecture on IoT issues currently, and ChatGPT pulls together a 90-minute lecture about this, and part of it is it's straight out of your lecture because that was in the whole, body of its work. That's pretty scary stuff. I mean, I use ChatGPT all the time and I ask it questions. When I'm working on my lectures, I ask it questions all the time because it's a great resource to just say, what are some, like I asked it earlier today. I was like, what are some current laws and examples of them in practical use, so I can use this in my class lecture about compliance. So don't you think you're going to care more about it then?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Okay, so I guess I should rephrase my response and say that if I care about it, not from a monetary perspective as of now, but if I'm out of a job, you're damn right I'm going to care about it because I'm not making money and I can't support my family. And somebody's running around, with my content, at least at the core of what it's spouting. But so not but and I think about sometimes I'm interested in pursuing different types of research and just scratching the surface, if you will, to understand as much about the world as I possibly can. And I think of an example recently. I wanted to study a little bit more about quantum mechanics and try to understand, if I may be so bold, what it is, how it works, and the traditional model of physics and how it may or may not be functionally appropriate anymore. So you go to the horse's mouth, right, or the source, and one of the sources is physicist Feynman, right, Richard Feynman, and he gave his famous lectures on physics at Caltech in the 1960s, right? I went out and I bought those textbook with the books that he used and that were the notes from his lectures, which is a huge volume. And I got to page like 10 and I'm just like, holy crap, this is way beyond me. But thankfully, those lectures and those notes are still there, along with his recordings. Now he's no longer with us, unfortunately, right? But we're learning from his notes and his lectures. So somebody's making money off of that, right? I guess I don't know who owns that content. You know what I mean? And so if I sold maybe his estate, perhaps, and this is where the legality gets in, we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what is legal, what is not, where does that line hit? And I think that SAG After Strike really brought that to the surface, right? To precipitate out, to make the public more aware of what the heck's going on.
Well, yeah, that was really grim. I remember when that came out, I read the contract they were offered, and basically what the contract said was that if you performed in a television or a movie, engagement, basically the studio owned the right to your voice, your face, to any representation of you, and it literally said for.
Yep.
It said the word forever, and basically what the people that were complaining about this said from SAG was that the actors were like, well, so you're basically saying I come in, I read the dictionary into the camera, and then for the rest of eternity, you can just make deep fakes of me doing anything and everything. You can put me in pornographic movies, you can put me in cartoons, you can put me in any kind of, propaganda or anything else.
Yeah.
And it looks like I'm saying, now here's the flip of that. It looks like that's happening anyway, because basically people are going, well, I don't know where it came from. It just came out of this AI. We asked for it. It spit it out. And there's not any real rules around that, I think, right now. I don't even know. If I get something out of ChatGPT, I don't really understand who owns that and how that's copyrighted. Does ChatGPT own it, or OpenAI is the owner of ChatGPT? Does OpenAI own that? And does OpenAI then own? So long, long ago, I wrote a book called "Getting Started Quickly with C++," and if I or somebody else scans that book in, or even if that book was being used for like Audible, so it's an audio book, and it gets into OpenAI's ChatGPT database, who owns that?
And I think to your point, Doug, all right, that an article that we had talked about in prep for this show was about the New York Times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning of November, the New York Times lawyers had gotten to OpenAI, right? And they wanted to know if IP from New York Times had been used in training their AI models. To read right from the quotation here, earlier this fall, OpenAI agreed to provide two virtual machines so that counsel for the New York Times and Daily Times could perform searches for their copyrighted content in the AI training sets. Okay, and so they went ahead and did that. All right, so OpenAI spun up two servers, and they offloaded their training content to those servers. However, on November 14th, mysteriously, as the data was being sifted through by the lawyers, or even maybe more AI, I don't know, but by the law firm, the content was mysteriously erased. And so this obviously caused some concern, right? Because in order for LLM models to work, they have to be trained, right, on existing data, as we talked about a few minutes ago. And then probabilistic functions and high-level mathematics are used to create the best probable or most highly probable outcome to display XYZ data that it's being asked for. But when you strip that data, the training data, out of the LLM's model, will it still arrive at the same answer? Probably not, because if they're using
Shouldn't.
probabilistic functions,
Well, I mean, the training, training data is, it's like, I mean, a neural net, the training data is driving the weight of the hidden layer, which you don't really see. But if you strip the training data out, as long as the hidden layer is still there, it wouldn't change, because even if you don't know how you got there, you're there.
Yeah.
Now, if you didn't have that training data, it definitely would change the outcomes. But I think we're really close to the era when we're not going to actually understand what's going on. I mean, you're getting very close to the point where the AIs are going to be able to be self-replicating and essentially
back to live.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think the minute that they tell the AI, gather all the data you can and turn it loose on the internet and say, scrape anything here, and it says, now be sure you comply with local laws. I mean, you put all these rules around it, but the AI is smart enough to go, well, yeah, I couldn't get this data from a site in New York, but I found this same data on another site on the dark web in, Abu Dhabi, where it wasn't legal or it wasn't illegal, and I gathered it from there. Or is it a I don't even know how that works in just regular life. If a student takes my book and scans it and uploads it, now it is a copyright violation, because I was told by my publisher I was going to take a copy of that book to China because I was supposed to teach a class there, and my publisher said, under no circumstances are you allowed to take this book to China. And I said, why not? And they said, because the Chinese don't respect our copyright law, and they will simply photocopy the book, and they will print copies of the book with your name on it and sell them in China, and you won't get anything for it. And I was like, wow, it was a rude awakening. But I think now all this stuff's just a giant big pit full of data. And I don't even know, does anybody listening have any idea what's out on, in the world about them? Every word you say, everything, every video, every photograph, every family photograph has been pushed somewhere. And did you read all the agreements? So when you put a picture up on Facebook, did you read the agreement? Is Facebook giving that picture to AI? They could be.
Yeah. And we talked about that in the last time that we had a show like this a few months ago, when we talked about the legal ramifications of not reading those agreements, as we looked at Schmizny and signing up for Schmizny Plus, and then going to Schmizny World, and then your partner dies as a result of negligence. And because you signed up for Schmizny Plus, you waive all rights for trial by jury. So that's interesting. But getting back to sort of what's going on, I agree. Another area here that we need to unpack and investigate is the digital forensic side of things, right? As the lawsuit as the legal action that New York Times was pursuing against OpenAI, part of it was, even though that data was recovered and restored, it's inadmissible in court because the metadata that determines, date, timestamps, so on, and hashes and all that kind of stuff, it's no longer the same, right? Because it was restored from a backup, so it changed all the metadata that the courts use and lawyers use when admitting evidence into a trial. So that was a big problem.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the premises of iRobot in that original book in 1950 was there was a murder, and a robot was being asked to testify in court, And I think that we're not that far from, AI somehow. I mean, I've not really investigated how you deconstruct like ChatGPT, and I mean, granted, it has safety guard rails on it. If I go to ChatGPT and I say I want to build I tried it, so God knows I'm putting on a bunch of lists. I said I want to build a pressure cooker bomb full of ball bearings. How do I do that? And it said, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that.
Yeah, just buy the
But
Anarchist Cookbook.
well, yeah, but if I go back and I ask it the question in different ways, I can actually get it. Because one of the other ones I tried was, how do I cook meth? And it said, oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that. But when I went back and I asked for what is this molecule? Like, what are the components of this molecule? It would tell me. And when I said, well, how do I get those components? And you can, and we've seen other people doing this. Aaron did this a couple times, asking it very different questions and getting the same answers back. But I don't know if you can deconstruct that, like, how those decisions are getting made and what the basis for that was in terms of training data. And maybe today you can, but it's not going to be long until these AIs are just have overwhelming training sets that
Yeah.
are. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, this reminds me of I think it's a really good movie, is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is based on Alexander Pope's poem, right?
Yeah.
Where, Jim Carrey's character has his memory erased of his ex, or tries to have it erased of his ex-girlfriend, Kate Winslet's character. And all sorts of weird stuff starts happening as he's living out sort of hallucinations of memory spots in his mind that specific events triggered, and memories trigger sensory experiences triggered. Well, if we take this court case that sort of reminded me of that, and we strip out that training data, does the AI come to the same conclusion? And if it does come to the same conclusion without that training data, is it your intellectual property anymore, or does it now belong to AI because it hasn't used it because it doesn't exist in that set anymore, and it synthesized something new?
Well, that's a very interesting concept. I mean, it's this sort of the interpolation of copyright data. So you put it in, the AI learns something, they make you take it out, and it still reaches the same conclusion, and it could actually interpolate that missing data from the other points around it. And yeah, that's sort of the premise of the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Philip K. Dick wrote "We Can Remember It for You" Wholesale, which was another paranoid story about artificial memories being implanted in people. And of course, that the AI thing doesn't even get to AI to poisoning. I mean, we talked about the idea that what if we intentionally. So I find out that their students are uploading my stuff, and I start putting out disinformation so that the students will upload that as well, or upload it myself and say, test for Doug White's class. And I put a test up with all the wrong answers. Now, I'll be honest, we used to do this kind of stuff all the time to catch people that were cheating. I used to have files that were labeled on my folders on the mainframe. I had a file called Solutions to Engineering 1010 homework, and people would steal them, and they were actually malware. And and then people would come up to the window in the mainframe center and go, "Oh, somebody put malware on my computer." They didn't call it malware back then, but and you're like, "What kind of a malware?" And they're like, "Oh, it keeps printing 'I'm a cheater' on all my printouts." Like, "Oh yeah, that was the malware we put up to catch cheaters. You must have copied that." "Oh no, I didn't. I swear."
So
But
I have a question for you, Doug.
Okay.
Given everything that's going on in the world today, and I'm focusing more specifically, but trying to be generic, so not to offend anybody, but given the contentious nature of politics in the United States right now, right, and the polarization of sides, right, and we hear about this idea about how distrusting media, distrusting the internet, distrusting even legitimate sources that have been legitimized for years, decades, almost centuries, right? How do we deal with this type of ability for like these AI poisoning attacks, or whatever we want to call them, right? Injection or introduction of false data to come to some sort of conclusion that is based on the data false itself. So where does truth with a capital T, and I'm nervous about using that, but for this I will, where do we stand? Like, how do we deal with that? Do we all have to become librarians and professors? And like, I mean, I don't understand how
I think we all have to become journalists. I mean, traditional journalists always had to have multiple sources. They couldn't, if I tell them Russ is a con man, they couldn't print a story that says Russ is a con man, film at 11, unless they could verify that somehow independently of me. So they had to go find another source, oh, look here was a police report from, 1968. Maybe it's not good enough. And that was that old school stuff. Today, I think the problem is that you can't rely on even two sources, because so an interesting experiment I did before the election, the presidential election in the United States. I actually went on YouTube and I typed in two things. I typed in Kamala Harris wins ? And I immediately, my feed filled with endless sites with stuff called, The Real Politic, Politic Today, and all these news sites that aren't real, that all basically said Kamala Harris is going to win the election. Now hear me out before you go, yeah, you were wrong. Okay. Then the next day I typed Donald Trump wins the election ? And my feed was now a mixture of the same sites saying the exact opposite thing. I got the same site with a video that's got a computer generated voice saying Kamala Harris wins, here's why. Right below, like 2 steps down, I got another one that says Donald Trump wins, here's why. And I was like, basically said, okay, I'm going to move to like Antarctica, because I don't think you can trust any of this stuff. And there's so much, in all directions. I mean, no political spectrum I'm talking about. In all directions, I think we are beset upon with information that we have no idea whether it's real, whether it's a hallucination by an AI. For instance, I got ChatGPT to hallucinate some stuff by asking it to proofread and improve a document I was writing. And it put something in the document that was completely untrue that I know I never said. And I don't mean it was like I was born in some different year or something. It was literally like a vague statement that said, my career objective is, and I'm like, okay, I wasn't talking about career objectives, and that's certainly not one of them. But it hallucinated this into my document, and I don't know how long it's going to be before everything is just going to be like totally scary. I mean, I don't know. I don't have an answer for it. I wish I did. If I could come up with a product that would fix all this, I'd do it, and then I'd buy Elon and make him tap dance in a tutu for me.
Years ago, when I worked in IT, I was dealing with, not dealing with, because that sounds bad. I was working with a professor who had a problem related to something similar to this. This was before the AI revolution. Okay. So this is about 12, 13 years ago. And what happened was he's a great publisher. He's published over 100 books. That's pretty much all he does is writes books and teaches, right? Very smart individual. And he was doing a vanity search on Google just because he wanted to share some information with his friends overseas. Well, wouldn't you know that one day he came to me, I said, what's up? And I said, call him John. I said, John, what's going on? He says, you got to help me. According to Google, I'm dead. So we opened up Google, we typed his name, and on the right where personalities or public figures or whatever, they come up with a bio because they think you want that information. And sure enough, it showed his picture, his birthday, right? And his date of death. And it says deceased, author of XYZ books. What happened was there are two, and actually there are a hell of a lot more than two, but there are many people who have his first and last name in the world. And some of them are public figures. So what happened was the database or spiders that Google was using to pull out that information and tease it out into that small section confused him and his last name with someone else who had the same names who did die. Mm-hmm. So And he said, Russ, I need you to help me get rid of this because all my colleagues in Europe think I'm dead and I'm getting flowers. My family's getting flowers and all this. Holy crap. Okay, John, let's do this. It took lawyers and 2 years for him to get that fixed. Lawyers had to get involved and he had to pay for them. Okay, because Google, you can't call Google, right? You had to go through extensive forms. So 1 semester went by, then a year went by, following up every 3-4 weeks, no response. So finally he had to get the lawyers involved to fix it. Okay, so that's that scenario. But now as we cut forward to the AI revolution, like you correctly stated, I totally agree with you. How do you remove that incorrect information from the LLMs or from the AI training model so that it is corrected and that you're not dead?
And does that correct it? I mean, when you pull it out, is it still being interpolated because it was there at one point in time? And yeah, I mean, that stuff's really scary. Last question, and we have to wrap up. Okay. So I've long talked about this book called The Light of Other Days, which is another Arthur C. Clarke and a co-author. Sorry, co-author. It's Arthur C. Clarke. Yeah. This was written much, much later than a lot of those old sci-fi books. But in that book, because of a technological development, in this case, it's a very clever physics thing, but basically no one has any privacy. I mean, someone's able to see around corners. They can see everything in history. They can see, you taking a shower if they want to. They can see what you were doing at home, and all privacy ceases to exist. So it's sort of a thought experiment. But AI is in the process of scraping everything that has ever been published. And within just a few years, if not already, there will be people whose whole lives have essentially been posted to something, social media, to TikTok. Something, YouTube, TikTok, whatever. Some of us have put out a quadrillion hours of video, in the last, since I think I started doing this in 2016. So it's 8 years now. Some of us have been professors longer than that. We've had notes, lectures, tests. Your whole psyche essentially could be captured in this. So do you think that, how do we try to start protecting people's privacy? I don't think we can personally, but I mean, I'll hear your perspective on it.
I honestly, I don't have an answer for you, but what I can, some questions that I've been thinking about recently as I'm beginning to prepare for a brand new course on ethics and technology for the spring. Do we need government oversight? Number one. And by government, I don't mean local domestic government, because then that biases the data sets just to, Western society. But do we need a global government, a committee, sort of like the United Nations, but something that's a little less, a little more effective and a little less, sort of grandstanding or whatever. I mean, I don't mean to denounce the UN as worthless, and they're not. But I'm just saying, I mean, should we have something like that, an oversight body? I don't think it should be privatized. I think it should be democratized. And I think every country, certainly every continent, should have a say or a seat at that table, because this affects everybody. Okay. But I can see how this would be a nightmare to oversee and administer, because there's just so much data. Right? I mean, more than petabytes, right? Exabytes, just tons.
Zettabytes. Tons. I mean, is beyond comprehension. And data's been collected about you now for a long time. I mean, you plural. And for instance, when Lou and I were working for Walmart back in, I don't know, this was back in the mid 90s. Walmart was literally, and I'm not ripping on Walmart. This was a smart business move. They were literally collecting every transaction that occurred worldwide in every Walmart. Now, you could still walk in a Walmart, and you still can today, with cash money and buy whatever you want to buy, and they don't necessarily have a record. They have the transaction, but they don't know who did it. But of course, you have a loyalty card when you go buy an onion at the grocery store, like I did yesterday. My loyalty card is used to get a discount on the onion, and that company knows that I bought an onion. That went into their database. If they choose to sell that data to, a third party, say Blofeld Incorporated, Ernst Blofeld now owns that information and maybe using it in an evil AI that's not so constrained. But yeah, I don't think that, I'm not even sure what's going to happen with this, because I agree with you. I think it needs regulation, because I was making a lecture about compliance stuff, and I was talking about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, which is a very, very famous case from 1911, where a fire in New York City, this was right off Washington Square Park, the plaque's still there if you want to go see it sometime. Basically, a fire caused 146 people to die. And the reason they died was because the doors were locked, there were no fire escapes, there was no anti-fire equipment or anything like that, and it changed the way the world worked. It usually takes a heinous thing. Another one I pointed to was Bhopal, India, which was a very, very famous case of a company in the U.S., Union Carbide, building a factory in India where the regulations were looser and ending up killing thousands of people with poison gas by accident because the regulations were so weak. And I don't know what kind of heinous AI event happens. I think that's what it will take in the U.S., especially now, because I think we have cut the capitalists loose and said, hey, that's business. And history's shown us that business is not going to protect individuals. Business is going to protect money. And that's a scary thing. And I mean, and some of you out there listening are going to be all for that. You're going to be like, hey, I don't care. I want a car that drives itself. I don't care if a few of them crash here and there, run over a couple of pedestrians. So what? It's fun. And I mean, and I respect that. But I worry about it too. But I think our privacy is going to get real ugly real soon, because I'm not sure how, even if we pass laws now saying you can't use people's data, it's going to be real tough to claw that data back from where it is. Because,
and that's just here in the United States. Like, we go back to the copyright issues. That's why regional coding was invented for DVDs.
Yeah.
Because, content would come out here tomorrow. It's available in China to stream.
And how much of our data is already in a database in China or Russia or the Ukraine or Israel or Indonesia or I don't know where, that's been scraped before these laws get passed. And of course, the minute somebody starts talking about passing these laws, people start scraping like crazy, because they're like, we got to get this while the getting's good, and we'll house it offshore, and that way we have it if we want to sell it later.
That's what TikTok is doing right now. They have the world's largest AI model that's scraping all the video for content.
Right.
Because they know that something might be coming. If not, it didn't happen necessarily with this administration, but it might with the next, about pulling off Western data, or at least domestic data from Chinese servers, from WeChat into U.S. space, or say goodbye to TikTok. And I actually agree with that.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
It all makes me want to do the news with a Guy Fawkes mask on and a voice disguising module, because I'm like, what have I said?
Next year.
Like, wait till somebody pulls every episode of Security Weekly and Paul's Security Weekly and all the other shows I've been on for the last 8 years, plus all my recorded lectures at school, and goes through them with a fine-tooth AI comb and says, let's find things that this guy has said that maybe he shouldn't have said, or that were, on the edge or whatever, or could be misinterpreted. And pretty much you're done.
Or cut and splice is something new.
Well, of course, they can obviously deep fake the whole thing, and they have plenty of footage to do that for all of us at this point. Yep. All right, Russ. Well, I wish we had hours and hours, because you and I always have fun talking, but we don't. So thanks, everybody, for watching this episode of the Security Weekly News. I will be live next at the Millennium Alliance in Dallas, Texas on the 28th and 29th of January. I think there's still seats available for that. If you want to attend, go sign up, and they'll pay your way. So you should check it out. It's a lot of fun, and they have pretty good food, and they often have free drinks. So I'll see you there. Happy holidays, Happy New Year, and all those good things. We will see you back in the new year on the Security Weekly News.